We can all want to change. Everybody wants to change if our lifestyle isn't suiting us for whatever reason. But unless you change the core belief system behind anything, it could be an addiction, it could be an unhealthy habit of some sort or pattern of behaviour. If we don't change the belief behind the behaviour, nothing changes. Our energy attracts. If we're not working on ourselves, you can't say bad things happen, that's an injustice. Identify unhelpful thoughts and beliefs, bring them to the surface, challenge them, and then shift them and create new ones. When they found me guilty, it wasn't just like a normal prison sentence. Because I'd been in trouble before, in the UK, and it's called indeterminate public protection. At the time, I was told I was never going to be released from prison. So I thought, I've just lost everything that ever mattered to me, my whole family, all my cats, the girl that I still loved. All of that had just gone in very, very short space of time. What do? There was that resilience within me to sort of just say, get up and just keep going.
Welcome to CEO Conversations by ENG, a global community for builders and leaders where we sit down for the real, the unfiltered conversations with the people building the businesses and the people that keep them running. I'm your host, LaShawn Charles, the founder of Entrepreneurs Networking Group. Today's conversation is about resilience, identity, and what it really means to rebuild your life and your work from the inside out. Today, I'm joined by Marc Singer, owner of Marc Singer Coaching. Marc's journey is one of the most profound transformations from life-altering injustice to becoming a highly successful coach focused on helping people master their mindset and their energy. Marc, thank you for coming here today with us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on.
So how are you doing today? How are you feeling? You're currently located in the UK, right?
Yeah, I'm in a place called Hertfordshire, which is just near London. So not far from 20 minutes from London. So yeah, not too far. I'm all right. As I said before we went live, the weather's not great, but it is what it is. It's January.
Well, I thank you for not only just being a part of the first season of CEO Conversations, but I thank you for being one of the founding members of our Entrepreneurs Networking community and for always just sharing knowledge and things like that. So before we kick off your interview, I just wanted to tell you how much I'm thankful for you and for being a part of our community and just for everything that you've done.
Thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure as well. So thank you very much for having me on at the start.
Awesome. So for today, we're just going to have conversation. It's going to be conversational. I want to start off from the start. Where was Marc? Who was Marc as a kid? Take me all the way back before entrepreneurship became a part of your life. Who was Marc in the beginning?
So yeah, my parents were met, and my dad was from the east end of London and my mother was from a place called Bushy in Hertfordshire. And so it was a bit of a contrast because one was a very working class area, one was a middle class sort of area. And so anyway, they met, married and had me. And I was born in a place called Barnet, which is in London. It's Greater London. And I grew up in quite a good life, affluent sort of lifestyle. My father was a market trader. When I say market, I don't mean stock markets. I mean street markets. Back in the 60s and 70s, street markets. And he was incredibly successful back then. And as a result of his success in the markets, my family ended up creating leather goods retail stores back in the 80s and 90s. That became very successful and it led to us having a very good lifestyle. We went on holiday. I used to go to America literally every year, all through my early days, my younger days. For about 7 or 8 years in a row, we went for 2-3 months at a time to the States. So I know America quite well. So I had a private education. We grew up in a really nice house. Everything was great on the surface of that lifestyle. I grew up not really wanting for anything at that stage, but I sort of went off the tracks a little bit. I was a bit of a naughty kid because I was a bit of a rebel. I think yeah, I used to like playing around in school and things like that, being the naughty kid, the one who was, always wanted the attention sort of thing. And so I got a bit of reputation for that. And then when I left in the UK, we have like junior school and then secondary school. When I left to go to secondary school, I'd never experienced anything like bullying, racism, any sort of prejudice in my life up to that point. And I went to a new school, and for the first time ever, I was really badly bullied and targeted for my ethnicity. I'm Jewish. So but my background was Jewish, and it was a predominantly Asian area. And for the first time in my life, I experienced what that felt like. And I was beaten up pretty much badly, quite regular. And that went on for about 6 months. And for about that 6-month period, I put on weight because I was obviously depressed, and I'd lost sort of like natural sort of humor and all the rest of it. And I was just really going within myself. And so that I must have been about 12, around about that time, 12 or 13 perhaps. Anyway, so my parents took me out of that school. And that was a private school, and they sent me to a different school. And that school was what we call in the UK a state school. So you had private school and obviously state school. So it was a bit more rough and ready. But I then encountered bullying, but for a different reason. It was because I was now overweight. So it wasn't because of my background or culture or anything like that. It was because of the way I looked, basically. And so I started using humor as a defense mechanism, and I started, managing to deal with that in a way where I was all right. I became quite popular and so on because I was quite funny. So I wasn't badly beaten up or anything like that in that school. It started off that way, but then I managed to sort of make people laugh and got them around to my way of thinking. But I think what I felt at that time was a need to be included somewhere. I didn't have that sort of community where I fitted in. And it was always a need to fit in somewhere because that school was a long way from where I lived. So I had to commute to that school. And it wasn't like I had the group of friends after school and things like that. So I was very secluded. I used to go home after school and, not really doing much else. My family were very obviously doing well with the business at that time. But then I started going to football matches. In the UK, in America, soccer, we call it soccer, but in the UK, it's called football. And I used to go with my grandfather, and it was around the age of 14 that I first sort of noticed or became aware of football hooliganism. Now, again, in America, it's not so big, but in the UK, specifically in the 70s, 80s and 90s, there was a whole movement called the casual movement, casual culture. It's all about football violence, basically. And it's not just about fighting. It was about like, the clothes, the music. It was a whole thing. It's a whole like sort of cult scene. And I first noticed that when I was about 14 and became, transfixed with it, really. And I think that was obviously part of the need to be accepted and part of something. So I became intoxicated by that scene. I stopped wanting to go to football with my grandfather and started hanging around with the group of lads and people who were involved in that scene. And that was around about 15. I got involved in that and I started really getting into that. And I remember at that stage, again, at that early age, you don't know who you are. You have got no real idea of your real identity internally. And you're just trying to sort of mold yourself into a group, into a certain way of being, an image. And I created this sort of persona, this image of who I thought I wanted to be. And it mirrored the older lads in the group who were already sort of, in my view at the time, respected. I now know that it's not really respect, it was more fear. But as a young kid, you see that through a different lens and you see, look, everyone wants to know them. They're the popular guys, So you start molding yourself into that sort of illusion of what you want to be. That meant I started acting a certain way. I felt I needed to prove myself to the bigger crowd, because even in that crowd there, and I'd encountered bullying before, I was still getting it a lot, intimidated, and people pushing you around at that young age. So I felt the need to sort of, again, prove myself and fit in. Yeah. And I made a pact with myself to be the number one guy there, to be one of the main faces, as we used to call it. And for the next 10 years, that became my life. You know, I was embroiled in this lifestyle. I was working, I was doing all right financially, and, you know, I still had a good background. But part of that scene is also about, you know, using drugs, getting involved in fights, stuff like that. So it was very antisocial. And it's also, you know, a constant sort of need to sort of be seen or recognised and be seen. So, yeah, I created an image, and that sort of led me into trouble with the police around the age of, it must have been about the age of 23, 24. I started getting arrested and in trouble with the police. And that led me to prison for the first time. I ended up in prison 2 times for football hooliganism, only for very short periods, like a few months. But for nothing serious in terms of really bad fights or anything like that. It was just like, you know, what we call in the UK a fray, where it's just like a group fight, basically. And so I'd ended up in prison for that, but I didn't learn my lesson at that young age. I still thought it was like a badge of honour, you know. And if anything, it enhanced my reputation. So the reputation that I'd been chasing at that young age, I now had it. But then when I had it, I didn't want it. It was like, I've got what I want, but I don't actually want that now. And so anyway, I got banned from football for life. And funny enough, I'm going to football after this, but because that's been taken off now. But at the time, I was banned for life. And yeah, so around the age of 25, I'd moved away from the football scene because I was now banned and I'd been in prison twice. And I started getting involved in a different scene, which was also about just needing to fit in, wanted to be accepted. It was that scene of, you know, going out clubbing, using drugs. You know, it was like the club scene, basically. And that became my new thing. And so I got involved in that. But what I hadn't done is worked on the internal narrative that I was feeding myself that led me to be that way in the first place. So what I found is that even though I, on the surface, had told myself, now I'm not involved in that anymore, I've moved away from that now, I hadn't really actually changed anything. So it wasn't long before I found myself in a situation where someone challenged me, or it was a challenging situation. Someone stole my phone. I ended up in another fight. This time I assaulted a guy and I got arrested for that too. And I ended up back in prison for that too. So that was my 3rd time. So
Oh, wow.
I've got a story. I've done the book's coming out soon, but this is the best bit. Well, it's not the best bit; it's the worst bit. But cherry on the cake is to come. Anyway, so I didn't learn my lesson. Yeah. I went away and I got 4 years in the Old Bailey, which is the #1 court in the UK.
So at this point, how much time have you served so far? Because I see you've been going back and forth. So at this point, we're aged, how old are we right now? Around 25-ish?
So when I went to the 3rd time, what would I age-wise? I would have been older than that. I would have been, no, because that wasn't straight after. I had 2 for the football, which was 23, 24. And then... Yeah. 2007 that was. So how old would I have been then? That was, oh God, I was probably about 30, early 30s.
Okay, so now we're 30. And now at 30, about how much time have you served so far?
I'd only done a couple of months, 2-3 months in the first 2. So
okay, but we're noticing like the pattern of the internal work, right? We're noticing the pattern.
Now, yeah, but I mean, at this stage I hadn't, no. Because by the 3rd time, that was where I sort of hadn't learnt the lesson that I should have learnt at the early stage. So I went to prison for this assault, and that was actually a bad situation. I'd actually hurt someone. The previous 2, no one actually got hurt, and so this was a turning point for me. I'd now got myself into a situation where I'd not only gained myself a certain reputation as being this violent person, but I'd also created this whole toxic environment for myself in terms of my lifestyle, you know what I mean? So it was very hard to break free of that, you know? And so I came out of prison after 2 years. I mean, I'm not going to go into the full details of what happened in terms of the fallout of that, not so much the actual incident. I'm talking about because I had my girlfriend, I was in love with my girlfriend, we had to break up because of it and so on. That led to me having a breakdown. It was a whole toxic situation. So I came out after 2 years. I thought to myself, I'd moved away from it. I'm having a peaceful life. I'm not getting involved in anything like that again. But then what happened was I went back, I got a job that I used to be in the car trade. So I went back into the car trade like I had done before the third prison sentence. This time I met a new girl who was called Katie. Now, the previous girlfriend was also called Katie. You can see a pattern here, can't you? And what happened was I just went straight back to the old lifestyle because, again, this is one of the things I now teach my clients. We can all want to change. Everybody wants to change if our lifestyle isn't suiting us for whatever reason. But unless you change the core belief system behind anything, it could be an addiction, it could be an unhealthy habit of some sort or pattern of behavior. If we don't change the belief behind the behavior, nothing changes. So a lot of people try and stop drinking and taking drugs, and then they'll just say, right, I've stopped taking drugs. And then they'll relapse again as soon as life gets hard again. And they wonder why. Well, it's because you haven't changed the internal narrative. And this is one of the things you have to do if you really want to change your life. And so coming back to the situation, I'd come out of prison. I told myself I was going to be a different person, but then I went straight back to the old ways of being again. This time I was working in a car dealership and I was doing very well at the time. This is now 2010.
Okay.
I found myself in the situation at a work Christmas party where a guy who was working with our branch got attacked by 4 other guys. And my girlfriend, I wasn't involved personally. My girlfriend got involved to break the fight up, so to speak, and she got attacked. Someone told me about it and I came out and I ended up having an argument with these guys. I got attacked by these guys and beaten up and put in hospital by them. So I wasn't the one who was violent to them, but I got accused of being violent to them by them. So it was basically, they said, well, he attacked us and we defended ourselves, sort of thing. Long story short, I got arrested for that because of my past. And the police basically looked at my past, went to court, got charged with that, ended up in court. There was no evidence. There was no physical evidence. There was no forensic evidence. There was no CCTV that backed up the charge. It was simply these guys' word against mine against theirs, saying that I'd attacked them, basically. And so, long story short, I was found guilty of that. That was the one that I didn't do. And so, this is like when you said at the start about injustice. I mean, I'm very quick to say, yes, this was an injustice. I was not guilty of that thing, but our energy attracts. If we're not working on ourselves, you can't say bad things happen. That's an injustice. I created that whole scenario myself by not learning the lessons earlier in my life. Had I done that, that wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So can I really say it was an injustice? So this is the thing, yes, it was an injustice on the surface maybe, but at the end of the day, it was my fault that I was in that situation. So I'm not blaming the government. I'm not blaming the jury for finding me guilty, because I would have done the same if I was in their shoes, So that's how I sort of rationalized it. Because what happened is when they found me guilty, it wasn't just like a normal prison sentence. Because I'd been in trouble before, in the UK, what you had at the time, and it's now been abolished, this sentence for being inhumane. It's called IPP, and it's called Indeterminate Public Protection. Now, what that means is if you've been involved in a crime such as violence in the past, and you've done a similar thing in the present, you can get what they called then it's like an indeterminate sentence with no release date. Now, back then, no one was getting out with these things because the release test was that you had to prove that you were never going to offend again, which is an impossible task. So what actually happened with me is that I was given this sentence in 2011, ironically, and I'm very spiritual now. The date I got sent to prison was the 11th of the 11th, 2011 at 11 a.m. in the morning. So anyone who's into the angel numbers and spiritual stuff.
I'm spiritual too. So, once you said 11:11, I'm like, okay.
New beginnings on a massive scale. So there you go. And so that wasn't the first time I'd seen the 11s either, but that's another story. But that's when I went to prison. Mad. So at the time I was told I was never going to be released from prison. That's what the barrister told me. That's what my mother was told. So yeah, they said, get it out of your head. You're not going to get out. You might as well just accept it, basically. But I didn't accept it.
Point,
yeah, go on.
At this point, your away in prison, no release date is set because you're a repeated offender, but this is the one situation that you was actually innocent because you was helping your friend out, right? What are you feeling in the moment once they charged you or said you're guilty, and once you knew that I have no release date? What was your thought process in that moment?
Do you know what? The truth of the matter is I was numb. I was completely numb. I hadn't really sort of accepted it. There was still that mindset that I was not guilty. And I was still in that mindset that I'm going to fight this and we're going to get it overturned. My mum and my family and other people, friends, were all like going crazy about it, saying, right, we're going to fight this and we're going to get this turned over and everything else. So when I went to prison, the day I got sentenced, there was something like 80 people turned up to support me. So the judge actually said, I've never known someone who's been accused of an offence like this to get so much support. I felt like saying, doesn't that tell you something? But but the bottom line is that I hadn't really accepted it. And so I went to prison thinking that, something was going to change. I was going to get it overturned or, whatever. But the reality is the appeal process didn't work. We appealed it on 2 occasions. It didn't change anything. They said, well, unless you've got new evidence, we're not going to change anything. So I couldn't get it overturned. But what I did have was, I've always been one of these people who tries to see the best in things. I'm an optimist. I've had my problems and stuff in the past, but I've always had that underlying sort of nature where I'm an optimist. And so I sort of believed at that stage that something would happen, and everybody was saying nothing will happen, forget about it. But when I went to prison, I was like very determined to proving to people that
the proven, yeah,
exactly, prove that I was not guilty, or that I was not a threat to society,
right?
And that meant doing lots of courses, what they used to call offending behaviour courses, to prove my innocence or prove that I'm not, I'm able to go back into society. So that became my focus. It was like just doing these courses all the time and working, on myself, And I think for the first 2 years, that was all right. That was fine. I was quite positive. I was feeling good about it. I was feeling like, I was making progress within myself. I'd taken responsibility for the situation, in terms of I wasn't blaming anyone for it. I'd actually turned around and said, well, it's, I've got to take responsibility for this because it's ultimately my fault, even though I didn't do the crime. So I'd done that at quite an early stage. But then everything sort of changed when it was 2013. This is Christmas 2013 now. I've been in since 2011. And as we're approaching that period, the prison I was in, they said that you can't have clothes in after November 2013. So my mum, I was on the phone to my mum going, look, you've got to get me this tracksuit or whatever, clothes, to get these clothes sent in to me. Before the deadline. So I'd been going crazy at her, bless her heart, to get these clothes in, and hadn't thought for 2 seconds about her needs or what she was going through, and that hurts me now, because looking back then, I was just so focused on my own needs and not anyone else's. I was just thinking about what I wanted, and yeah that hurts. But I mean, because what happened was, on the back of that was the end. That was the 30th of November 2013. By the 7th of December, she'd collapsed and she was in hospital. By the 14th, she'd been diagnosed with cancer, incurable cancer. And by the 21st, she has died.
Wow.
That was 2 weeks from the moment she went to hospital. So, and I'm looking at a picture as I'm talking to you, I'm looking right in her eyes here. It's crazy how quick that was. But I'll be honest with you, I personally think she knew she had cancer before, but she just didn't let me know.
Because of everything that you were dealing with, yeah.
I think right at the start, when I went to prison, she was very much aware that she was ill, and that she knew that she didn't have long, and that she didn't really want to go in, tell me about that, obviously, with what was going on.
Right.
Because she told my cousin, I'm not going to be here when he comes out. So I never knew that. I didn't know that until after I came out of prison. So, but at the time, that's just so anyway, she died. And again, I don't know if you're a cat lover, but I had my cat, who was like my baby. She was like my everything, she was like a sibling to me, or a baby. and she passed the day before my mum. Literally the day before my mum, because it was weird. My mum was in hospital at this stage, and I'll tell you another story in a minute, but I'd phoned my dad to see how my mum was, expecting to hear the worst news. And he was in tears, and he's gone, Tipsy's died. And I was like, what? That's my cat. It just threw me because I wasn't expecting to hear that.
Yeah.
And then the very next day, at exactly the same time, 10 a.m. in the morning, I went to make that phone call again to my dad. This time it was my mum. So I lost my cat and my mum, the two, and people might laugh at that cat, So yeah, so that was like the hammer blow. And but just going back before that, I mean, I put in to go and see my mum in hospital. She was in a coma at this stage, and I put in to go and see her, and at the prison, and they came and saw me and said to me one day, this is about, I don't know, about 4 or 5 days, no, not even that long, 3 days before she died. You can go and see your mum now, but if you do, you're not going to be able to go to the funeral. So I had to make a choice within 5 minutes whether to see my mum,
either now or the funeral.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that was a horrendous thing to have to put to make a choice about. But I had to arrange the funeral because my dad wasn't very well, and I'm an only child. And so I had to sort of I phoned my dad and I said, what should I do? And he goes, look, Mark, I need you there. So I had no real choice but what to do about that. So I had to go to the funeral. And he said, look, she's in a coma. She's not going to see you anyway. So I gave up the opportunity to say goodbye, so to speak. And that was that. So hard. So that was that. That was the funeral. And then the funeral, came in January. 2 months after that, I lost my dad. This time it was a cardiac arrest.
2 months?
It was after the funeral. So my mum died on December the 21st, 2013. My dad died March the 22nd, 2014. So 3 months.
Wow.
2 months after the funeral. I was on the phone to him one morning and he just dropped down dead from a cardiac arrest as I was talking to him. So that was that.
Wow. So no warning. It was immediate.
To be honest, yeah, that was obviously on the phone. It was immediate, but he'd given up. He couldn't cope on his own. He'd given up hope because one of the last things my mum said to me is make sure your father takes his medication he had a overreactive thyroid. And so I'd be saying to him, are you taking your medication? There's not much I can do in prison. And and he's just saying, yeah. And I found out later he was just not taking his medication. So what could I do? But it was very difficult because he'd just given up. And there's not much you can really do to sort of help or motivate us.
Wow.
Sort of get someone to say.
So at this point, you're about 4 years-ish in your sentence. You've lost your cat and your mom within 48 hours. Your dad, 3 months after that. First off, I'm so sorry for your loss because, I've also experienced losing a parent as well. And that's something that never goes away. You know what I mean? Like, no matter how many years have passed, we just find ways to cope, but time doesn't really heal those type of wounds. So at this point, and I'm not sure how the prison conditions were, but what is your outlet at this point? Like, what are you doing? Because by now, anyone in your situation will go crazy. So what are you doing to just keep yourself just, getting up the next day or motivated? What was your outlet at this point?
Well, I'm going to share something positive with you now about my mum, which is directly linked to what we just said about when we lose loved ones. And like one of the things my mum, I mean, I've always been quite openly minded to spirituality. Okay. My mum was very spiritual herself. She sort of flirted with Buddhism when she was younger and things like that. So she was very open-minded as well. And she always used to say to me at a very young age, when someone passes, lights flicker or a bulb goes out or something like that. And that was always in the back of my mind. And about 3 weeks before she got ill, not before she died, but before she got ill, I remember phoning my mum. And there was a story that she told me growing up in the back of my mind, right? She told me years before about how when she was 17 years old, she was sat in her bedroom, and on the edge of one night, she was looked up, and there was a woman sat on the edge of the bed on a dressing table. An old woman,
Wow.
very serene, calm, smiling, nice. And she goes, I sat there for about 45 minutes just looking at this woman and not really doing anything, just not reacting. And my mum wasn't this sort of person who makes stories up. She was a very serious woman. She wasn't a liar. She wasn't this person who just tells stories. So anyway, she told me that story years before. It was in my mind when I was in prison. And I never knew she was ill at this stage, remember? I phoned her 3 months before she went ill and said, tell me that story again. And I questioned her on it. I said, now, is that, you weren't imagining it? She never took drugs or anything like that. So I said, and she goes, Mark, it happened. That was it. So anyway, my mother died on a Saturday, like I've just told you. And on the Monday, I'm laying in the bed, just staring blankly at the television, not really thinking about anything. And we had these like strip lights above us, like these, you can imagine in prison cells. And I'm laying there, and all of a sudden, and I've been in cell for months, and nothing had ever changed. And the light starts flickering, right? And then I never really paid much attention to it. I just thought to myself, I'll just have to report that to maintenance in the morning, And anyway, I carried on sitting there. And then about 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, it did it again. This time I've noticed it, and that thought popped into my head about what my mum used to say. So I thought, I'm going to watch it and keep an eye on it and make sure. And if it carries on flickering, then I just know it's a fault, And so I sat there for probably about 2 hours. Nothing happened. So I got up, and it's now about, I don't know, midnight. And I'm about to brush my teeth and to go to sleep and everything. And I looked up at the light again. I said, now, flick it one more time. If you do, I said it out loud, if it's you, I'll believe it's you. And it instantly flickered, right? And I went, whoa, like that. All the hair stood up on the back of my head, and I felt ecstatic. I felt this emotion right through me, the elation, right? It was like, I just felt happy, yeah. And that was in that moment. And then, so I thought, I'll watch it again. And I sat there for another hour. Nothing happened. And then just before, and it's now about 1 a.m., 2 a.m. or whatever, and I just said it again. Do it one more time just to prove it's you. And it instantly did it. And that's no word of a lie. That's true. But that's not the end of the story. I was in that cell for another month or so. I watched that light like a bloody hawk to see if it happened again, and it didn't. I moved to a new prison to be closer to my dad. I'm in a completely different prison. My dad dies 3 months later, as I said. He died on a Saturday. It's now the Monday, again, exactly same time span between when my mum died. Guess what happens in the new cell? Exactly the same thing. Wow. The light, but this time it was a bit different. Instead of just flickering once or twice, it went on like a bloody nightclub. It was like on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off, like that constantly for about an hour and a half.
Wow.
So I'm in no doubt, and I've had experiences since then, since I've been out as well. I'm in no doubt whatsoever that they're still with us. In fact, I know they are. So I don't struggle with that anymore. I don't feel any sort of like pain or anything like that of loss. I feel actually more close. Yes, it's hard. Don't get me wrong. The physical aspect is gone, but I've had more connections and experiences since I've worked on myself in my own consciousness over the last 3, 4, 5 years or whatever than I can imagine. And there's no doubt, whether it's angel numbers, feathers, people, things, mad, random things happening. Even two days ago, I was like, it was my mum's brother's anniversary. It was his birthday. That was it. And he died when he was 51. And I hadn't got any photos of him out. And I was getting something out of the cupboard, and his photo just flew out and landed on the floor of him.
Oh, wow.
So they're there. And so I think when you open yourself up to this stuff, you start seeing it from a different perspective, and it's not anything for sort of, it's sad because, obviously they're not here in the physical, but they're still here.
Yeah. That's amazing that you have your spirituality, and that could be a whole other conversation that we could have
Well, it is very much
about.
in line with my work, to be fair. That's a
Yeah.
different thing altogether. But I mean, it is very much what I do in terms of the work. My work's all about raising your consciousness and becoming more self-aware and understanding, your energy. This is the stuff that helps you see all of that stuff, because if we're operating at a low level of energy all the time, we miss all of these signs. And this is ultimately what it's about.
I'm so glad you said that, because now we're building up your story, right? So now it's starting to make sense. And the closer we get, the more I'm interested in exactly, or for the public to know exactly what it is that you do. But before, we're connecting the dots to see how we got here.
You can't have a transformation without a backstory,
Yeah, we have to have the backstory. You know what I mean? Like it just adds so much depth to it. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're at the point to where your father passed, right?
It gets better.
So
there's more to come. But so that's now 2014. My granddad died 2000. November. That was March 2014. My grandfather, who was 97, passed November 2014. So he was my last immediate family member. Not long after that, I think it was in October. When was that? No, it would have been October 2017 as well. 2014, sorry. I'd moved to what's called an open wing, right? And this in the UK, you have closed wings and open wings. And so if you're an open wing, you've got more benefits. You've got a key to the door, you've got carpets on the floor, you can cook your own food and so on. So it was a good move. It's for trusted prisoners, basically. So I'd moved to this new wing and I was quite in a good, it was a positive mood. So I phoned a friend of mine, my ex-girlfriend, Lucy, and I said to tell her about this move. And she'd been helping out with stuff like selling the family home. I had to get all my cats rehomed. We had 21 cats. And that's a different story. I'm not going down that road. We'll be all night with that. But she had helped out a lot with all the stuff that needed doing outside after my mum and dad and everything had died. So we were still in touch. And anyway, so I phoned her to let her know about my move. And she said, I've got some news for you. And I thought, oh, no, not more. I don't need any more bad news. And it turned out my best friend was now with my ex-girlfriend in Mexico together. And he told me that he was in Amsterdam. Not long before that, I'd given her £5,000 to go and buy a new car on the pretense that she was going to use it to come visit me. And for not to get back as a relationship, but as a companionship, and or a friend. And they ended up getting together, and that was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back, because up to that point I think I'd just blocked out the emotional element of it all to get through the day. I mean, after losing your mum and dad in a short space, I had to arrange the funerals, I had to sell the house and everything else. There was no way I could have just fallen apart emotionally. I had to deal with it, and mentally I had to be strong. I say strong, actually it's not strong, but I just had to block the emotions out.
Right.
And when I found out about that, I had a meltdown. I had a complete breakdown. I took a drug overdose, tried to kill myself, and that was awful. Luckily, because I was on this open wing, a friend of mine, a guy called Foxy, an Asian guy, he opened the door to ask to come in and see how I was, sort of thing, and found me on the floor. And he was the one who sort of revived me and got me back and saved me, really. And I was very weak, obviously. I was mentally and emotionally shattered. And it was that moment, the next day even, that was sort of my turning point. I thought to myself, there's two ways I can go here. I can fall apart. Because remember, I was also at that stage not thinking I'm ever getting out of prison. So I thought, I've just lost everything that ever mattered to me, my whole family, all my cats, the girl that I still loved. All of that had just gone in very, very short space of time.
Yeah.
While still being told that you're never going to get out of prison. So I thought, what do you do? What can I do? So I thought I can either be a victim of it, or I can take responsibility for myself and take back control of how I show up within this situation. And that ain't easy. But it was like literally because there was that resilience within me to sort of just say, get up and just keep going. And it was at that stage, I was literally in pieces. I was like, I could barely stand up physically. But I got up, went to work. I was working in a warehouse there. I got a job working in the prison education department, teaching, or as a classroom assistant teaching critical reasoning skills. And I worked there for 2 years, and that helped me, give me a bit more purpose. I started studying psychology. I started doing a degree in the prison. So I did that for 3 years, and gradually I started getting my self-respect back a little bit. And I was actually, you know, I had a lot of, everyone respected me as well for the way I was managing it. I wasn't going into a mad one and taking drugs and everything. I was doing all right, you know, helping people and stuff like that. So on the surface, things were going all right in terms of, you know, but it was obviously hard because I hadn't dealt with, I still boxed off all the emotional stuff. I hadn't dealt with any of that.
Yeah.
So long story short, I kept going until in 2017, they let me out. Very much against my expected. I had no expectations whatsoever. I went from what's called a parole hearing to go to a lesser security prison. But they said to me at the time, look, after everything you've been through, we've got no doubt that if you were to leave now, you'd cope with anything life can throw at you. That's what they said. So,
wow.
So they basically let me out. And that was in 2017.
So that's when, how many years have you served at this point?
That was 6 years I've done in total.
Wow. Starting off with all original, you didn't have a release date at all. No. So them just, I don't want to say randomly releasing you. What was that feeling that you got? Because at this point, you've changed your mentality, right? Because after you almost overdosed, at this point, you've changed your mentality where, okay, now I just have to, you know, be better or kind of look at the situation not in a victim mentality. And then now you're released. What goes through your mind at this point?
Well, I got into that sort of state mindset, I suppose, where I was only focusing on the moment. And I hadn't learned much at that time. I was doing a psychology degree. But I suppose I had that awareness to not focus too much into the distance. So I was only focusing on the day, like day by day. So when I got out, it was a shock because nothing was the same. And everybody who, you know, my family home had gone. I had the only reason I actually got out when I did actually, because I had an aunt and uncle who I actually didn't get on well with. And bless them though. I mean, they were visiting me to support me, but we never had that close relationship. It wasn't like a close family relationship. And I said to them, I said, look, I need to stay somewhere for 3 months when I've come out because that's the conditions. You've got to stay somewhere where you're, you know, a family member or whatever. And I didn't have anyone else. So I said, I need somewhere to stay. And they didn't want me to stay there. They're funny like that. And in the end, they gave in and said, okay, you can stay with us for 3 months. So I come out and they picked me up. Well, my uncle picked me up. But it was just really strange. It was just, I just felt empty, completely empty. Mm-hmm. There wasn't like excitement or anything like that, or I'm happy to be out. In fact, it was actually the opposite because I'd left all the people I knew in there. All the people who I was working with, all the friends I'd made, the officers even. I'd made good relationships with all of the officers. You know, so I'd left all of that behind. That was my safety. So I came out into this world where I no longer knew anyone. And all the people around me, I only saw the old me. They didn't know the new me. They hadn't, and it's not their fault. You know, it's just, you know, we see through lenses, you know, and if I've only known you through a certain situation in your life, I'm not going to know what you've been through. I'm not going to feel your pain and your experience. I can sort of empathize, but I can't really understand until I've walked in your shoes. And that's the truth. And, you know, we can all try and empathize with everybody else. I feel sorry for people or whatever. But unless you've actually been through something in life with something, you know, it's very individual because everybody is an individual.
Right.
You know? So I came out not really knowing anything. And I started deteriorating in my mindset again. You know, so I'd been very positive. Now I'm starting going back again because I'd felt lost. Luckily I had a bit of money behind me in terms of, because I'd sold the family home. So at least I had somewhere to live. I got a flat, but I was on my own and I couldn't really deal with anything because I was still blocked emotionally. So after about a year of not really knowing what I'm doing with my life, I'm ambling through life, feeling blocked. And I felt I was slowly going back to my old, ways, hanging around with certain people, doing things I shouldn't probably have been doing. And slowly I saw the signs coming back again that, I'm slipping. So it was 2018 and I'd been going to Reiki to try and unblock my emotions. And I had a coach, and she's a Reiki and coach, right? I had a bit of counseling and I had a bit of therapy prior to this, right? Neither of them really helped me massively. They were all right, but they didn't really massively because I was already quite self-aware in that area. But the coach, she said earlier when I was in prison, I'd done a business course. And one of the things they said to me was like, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And I was like, life coach. I don't know why I said it. It just came into my head and I just said it. I never knew what a life coach was at that stage. So anyway, they went off and researched life coaching and gave me all the information on it. And I looked at it and I thought, well, actually, I could do this. So anyway, fast forward, I'm now with this coach and I'm having Reiki and so on. And I said to her, I think I might do this, and I'd started looking at courses online and stuff like that, like, for £1,500 to become a coach, get a diploma and all this sort of stuff. And she said, Mark, if you're going to do it properly. Go to the best school you can find. It was the best advice she could have given because I thought, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. It was a cold, funny enough, we're in January and it's cold and it's raining here now. And it was exactly the same time in 2018, a cold, raining, miserable day. Probably the same time. I think it was the 18th of January. It was. What are we now? What's the date today?
Yeah, January 21st.
That's the 21st. Yeah, it was the 18th when I booked up. So I went on the ICF website, International Coaching Federation. And I looked at all the accredited, sort of coaching schools, and I found one called IPEC, and that's called the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching, right? They're based in America. And I just picked that one out by instinct. And I went for it. And I didn't even read their I didn't go too much into detail. I flicked through it, but I didn't really read it up and spend ages thinking about it. I just went for it, phoned them up, paid for it there and then. I think it was 11.5 grand I paid then. I paid more after, but at that point, it was £11,500 up front. I thought, I'm just going to do it. And that was it. Once I was in, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no clue what coaching was at that stage, really. But what it was, it blew. When I actually started my training, it was in the UK. It was face-to-face training, pre-COVID. So we could still do that. And, they taught me a methodology which changed my life, basically. It completely changed everything that I ever knew about myself. It's called energy leadership, where you're learning basically how to understand your mind, how you react under pressure and how we are when we're normal and when we're reactive under pressure, and our own energy, our core energy, our vibration, for want of a better word. And this aligns with obviously law of attraction and spirituality and stuff like that. So I basically learned how to sort of self-heal and work on myself and unlock all of that emotion and start working to release any sort of blockages that had got in the way of me being who I really wanted to be. And that was the start of the process. So I qualified professionally after about a year, but then I went on and did advanced training for another 3 years. So it's 4 years training in total I did with them. But what they taught me blew my mind and changed my life forever. And it was completely life changing. So yeah, that was 2018. And I set my business up in 2020. I think, when was COVID? That was 2020, wasn't it?
2020. Mm-hmm.
2020. Yeah. It was 2 months before COVID started that I set my business up. Yeah. I always pick the right time.
CZ.
So, yeah.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
you fell into your niche. Right. You fell into your niche. What advice would you give those entrepreneurs that are still trying to figure their niche out? Because your passion, I could assume, comes from what we just talked about. You know what I mean? Like your past experiences that led up to you pretty much was destined to be a life coach in a sense. You know what I mean? Your wealth of knowledge, your massive experiences led you up to that point. But what advice would you give those entrepreneurs that haven't found their niche or don't maybe haven't gone through those things to figure it out?
Well, to be totally honest with you, I've probably changed my niche about 10 times, if I'm honest.
Really?
Yeah, because as I've done the work on myself, things change. You attract differently, and it's all about the law of attraction. So obviously, I used to get a lot of people on drugs and stuff like that coming to me.
Yeah.
Because they saw themselves in me and, that sort of thing. But the truth of the matter is I can't really help people who are dysfunctional, who's still using drugs. I can only help people who are functional, who really want to move forward with their lives. That's ultimately what this work's about. So I think a lot of people misunderstood what I was doing. A lot of people thought it was therapy or counseling, things like that. But in terms of niche, coming back to that, I think it's just about being, don't pigeonhole yourself. Be flexible. Because things change. I mean, my website's now called The Men's Coach, but I work with women. So, I don't try and, I just focus on me and what I'm attracting, if I'm honest, without trying to sort of pigeonhole myself into a particular niche. You'll probably change that countless times before you find your real niche, who you really are. I mean, now it's all about spirituality for me. They're the people I want to work with, the people who are very open-minded and who just want to move forward with their lives. They're the people I want to work with, not the fixed types who are so rigid in their beliefs who don't want to ever change. You can't really help people who don't want to open their mind up. So, and I was attracting too many of those. So I think, yes, I mean, at the start, my niche was very much that sort of crowd. It's now opened up into a completely different area. So, yeah, so just be flexible and open.
That's a good point. Oh, that's awesome. All right. So now let's see, where are we in your story? Okay. So you said you changed your niche a bunch of times. So, okay. How do we get to where you are now, where you're full force spirituality? I want to know about your business. Like, let's hear it.
I mean, what people don't see is the work I do on myself. I'm pretty much self-healed. I mean, and I live and breathe. So it's worth me going back to the actual work, so people understand how I do that work. See, IPEC, right? The way it works is that they teach us right from the start to understand your belief system. Okay. We've got our brains. Most people have got brains anyway, but we've got brains. And if we're feeling stressed, our brains are releasing certain chemicals into our system. That's cortisol. It's adrenaline. Yeah. If we're feeling good, it's the opposite. It's oxytocin, dopamine, and so on. So the key is to understand how to create more uplifting chemicals and less draining chemicals. Now, if I'm unconsciously, not aware of what I'm thinking most of the time, basically lacking self-awareness, then most of my thoughts and beliefs are going to be driven from a belief system that's accrued over many years. It could be stuff that I developed at school from the bullying, for instance, or anything else that I've learned from my friends or the news, the media, or whatever it may be, friends, our culture, our upbringing. So all of these beliefs create the belief system we've got in our mind. And so that's our unconscious belief system. So if I'm not self-aware and I'm operating unconsciously, then that's like the default and it's running my life for me. So I'm reacting to everything that happens in life around me. The key is to understand how I can consciously take back control of the way I think and feel about myself so that I can actually identify unhelpful thoughts and beliefs, bring them to the surface, challenge them, and then shift them and create new ones. So that's the core of my work. It's helping people become self-aware and understand their belief system, and then learning how they can identify, challenge, and shift unhelpful thoughts, beliefs, perspectives, and fears, and so on. Now, the way we do that is using a framework called 7 levels of energy. And like I touched on before, this is all about like your vibration. So the lowest form would be like based on victim or conflict energy. The highest forms are like compassion, love, no judgment, joy, and so on. It's like a radio station. If you're listening to a low energy station, it's going to be full of static. If you're listening to the high energy station, it's going to be clearer. Your mind is no different. So this is learning how to tune your mind into a station that you want to listen to consciously. And it's life changing, because what happens is it doesn't make it easy life, because life's always going to be challenging, but it gives you power over how you respond to life. So you end up having less stress, less anxiety, less fear, less worry, less overthinking, more confidence, more self-worth, all the things that we want in life. And that, if I can create that, considering what I've been through and what I've been, in terms of healing and finding that peace of mind, finding that happiness from within, regardless of what's going on around me at any given time, then that's proof that this stuff works. And, I look around and I see people with far more than me in terms of family, money, success and so on. But a lot more reactive, a lot more stressed, a lot more angry, frustrated and so on like that. So, this is the difference. It's about becoming consciously aware. And this is essentially what this work's all about. It's learning how to sort of identify those patterns and those levels of energy that are draining us, and then switch.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is amazing.
It's life-changing. It's life-changing.
That is amazing. So getting into being a life coach, I myself, I'm also a certified life coach, but for those people or those entrepreneurs who are in that specific industry of being a life coach, who may not have went to as many courses as you did in schools as you did, what advice would you give them on how to get into the space in general?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have gone to schools and things like that. I mean, I know some fantastic coaches who have never, got any. It's about your person. It's about you as an individual. I think that really is key. I think, you could be the most trained coach in the world and have no personality. It doesn't make any difference. I think it all comes down to connection. I think if you can connect with people, then you're going to be fine. And I think it's ultimately about that. It's about having that ability to connect with people on their level. And I think that's the difference for me. I've always been able to sort of see people for who they are rather than the image and the act and all the rest of it. I can connect with people regardless of what their situation or background is or whatever it is, and have that human connection. I think that's the key, really. I think it's just being able to be that and understand that and meet people where they are. For me.
Right. So what's next for your business, or where do you want to keep it in the niche that it's at, or do you plan on maybe hiring on, other people who are life coach to your company? What the book? Oh, let's talk about it. Okay. When will we get a Marc Singer book, and what type?
That's that I'm hoping in this year. I need to get it written first. I mean, I started it about 3 years ago and shelved it because it didn't feel right. And so I wanted to do a bit more work on me, really, to get myself into a position where it felt right. And it feels right now. There's a lot of things I've got in the pipeline. I've been invited on some high profile podcasts in this year in the UK. One of the best ones I've been wanting to go on for ages. I've been invited on there. That's obviously going to hopefully coincide with, well, it won't coincide with the book because I'm going to go on there before the book, but I want to build up to that because ultimately I want to get my story out as soon as possible.
Yeah.
The coaching side of it is, I run it at the moment. The way it works with with the one-to-one coaching, I work with people for 6 months. So it's it's not like just single sessions. I work with people to help them basically transform their life. And it starts off, it's a 3-phase process where we've just touched on anyway. It's all about identifying whatever's getting in the way of you, moving forward, challenging that, changing that, and then embedding that. So I'm a very full on coach in terms of, it's not just the once a week sessions that I do with them. I see people or speak to people pretty much every day throughout the week as I support them and guide them and hold them accountable and challenge them and so on to move forward. So it's a full on process, but I want to really scale that onto a broader scale because I want to help more people, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line. I know that I've got something special here in terms of the process I use. I just want people to sort of, benefit from that as much as possible. And if that's through the pit or for podcasts or through working with me, all the better, you know. So that's what I really want to do. And I want to scale it up and take it to another level in terms of that. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for it. And look, you know, I'm here. I'm always here to support you. I'm here. I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. But before we wrap, what advice out of all of your experiences from your story, what would you say? I'm not going to do top 3. What is the best advice, or what advice do you feel in this moment that you could give to any of our viewers and listeners watching right now?
Never give up.
Wow.
Never give up.
Never give up.
No. It doesn't matter how hard things get in life. It's about the next step. That's all that you've got to take. You know, life is hard, and there's always, I could have given up a million times. It's not been easy, this journey. In fact, a lot of people expected me to. And all I do, I mean, this is part and parcel of the work I do with myself, is stay in the moment. I don't overthink anything. I don't think too far into the future. I focus on what I can do today. And sometimes that might be the most bare thing, a minimal thing, you know, just do, you know, but as long as I've, you know, put one foot in front of the other, then I'm moving forward. And that's all you can do. It's just keep going. You know, life changes in spectacular ways when you least expect it to. So have the faith, trust the process, you know, work on your energy, and you'll be fine.
Wow, I love that. Marc, thank you for your honesty and for trusting this space with your story. I know this conversation will resonate so deeply with the people who are navigating through their own turning points. So for everybody listening or watching, thank you for tuning in to CEO Conversations, and we will see you in the next episode. Marc, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.